Welcome back to the Let's Buy a Home podcast. I'm your host, first-time buyer mortgage advisor, Dan Knott. And if you're looking towards buying your first home, but you don't quite understand the legal process or what a property solicitor actually does, then this is the episode for you. I'm joined by Jazz from Taylor Rose Solicitors to answer all of your questions. So Jazz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be part of this.
Amazing. So my most asked question about property solicitors is, Dan, what does a property solicitor actually do? So Jazz, please enlighten us.
So we actually review the legal pack. We want to make sure that the owner is the person who's selling the property. We want to make sure that there's no restrictive covenants. So for example, I might have a client say to me, Jazz, I'm going to do like a side extension, rear extension. Is that all okay? I mean, subject to getting planning, we also need to check like the title documents. Is there any covenants there that are going to stop the seller, stop the buyer from actually purchasing the property? Amongst all that, we're also going to check that there's correct rights of way. So if there's like a side alley, rear alley, we want to make sure that all those rights are available to the buyer. We're going to apply for searches. So searches are a mandatory thing when clients are buying with a mortgage. And the searches consist of local search, environmental drainage search, and each of those are in respect to the property. So it will tell us whether there's any enforcement notices, whether there's any planning approvals pending, or contamination, whether the drains are connected. So we want to review all those documents. We want to also make sure it's in alignment with the sales memorandum and what has been offered. Because sometimes I have clients come to me and say, Jazz, I was paying a leasehold, but ground rent was £10, but you've told me it's 150. Completely out of line. Obviously, it affects the affordability. It affects from the lender's value as well. So we need to make sure everything is in accordance with what the client has actually paid for with the sales agent. And then once we've reviewed all the documents, we then pass it on to the client to do a final review. And then we start discussing a date for exchange and completion. In a nutshell, that's exactly what we do.
Yeah, so the answer is property solicitors do a lot. I often think that the legal side of the process is often the part of the home buying process that a home buyer understands the least and is also the least visible to a home buyer, because with a mortgage advisor, you're receiving your mortgage offer. You're then using that to get there on the house hunt, whereas the legal side of things is a little bit less obvious. Now, just to go back to the property searches, could you please run through the different types of searches, why they are important and how they differ?
Okay, so the three main ones is the first one will be the local search. The local search is basically telling us if there's any planning applications on the property, whether there's any rights of way. It will tell us whether there's any agreements on the property, any enforcement notices that we should be aware of. Whereas the environmental will tell us more about the contamination, whether there's a river nearby, whether it's subject to flooding. Sometimes I have clients that say to me, Jazz, there's no river nearby, but it's still subject to flooding. But obviously there's underneath surface flooding, or it could be any other forms of flooding as well. It doesn't necessarily need to be because there's a river or a sea or something nearby to the property. So it'll pick up on all of that. It will pick up on water and drainage as well, which will tell us whether the mains are connected, whether there's any sewer pipe underneath the property. So for example, the seller may think, well, the seller has actually done an extension to the rear of the property, but there was a pipe underneath. For a pipe underneath and then to extend on top of that pipe, they then need to get consent from Thames Water, for example. So it'll pick up on all of that as well. It's a lot to do with the property itself. So it's so crucial and so important to have that in place.
Thank you for that, providing some clarity, because I know that is an area that often causes a lot of confusion. In the UK, the process of buying a home can be a long one. I believe the average time period to complete the legal side of buying a home is around about 4 months. Why does it take so long?
I think it's various factors, to be honest, and it kind of depends who you're dealing with, what kind of transaction it is. So let's say someone like me, if I got a freehold remortgage, I'm looking to aiming to complete 7 to 10 days within receipt of a mortgage offer. I know some firms may say it's a bit longer, but that entirely depends on their caseload as well. How many files are they acting on? If it's a leasehold, it's going to generally take a little bit longer, only because then we're asking for a management pack. And then if the management pack then says to us, we have to go for a freeholder because the ground rent is paid separately. There's all these kind of like parties involved in the transaction. And then never mind if the client then says, I'm purchasing with a bridge, which means another set of solicitors. So I guess the more parties that are involved, the longer the transaction takes. Generally speaking, I would like to do all my transactions within 4 to 6 weeks. And that's what I aim for. So 4 months on a freehold, I don't know, I guess there's loss of communication, maybe bad service. It shouldn't take 4 months.
I agree. And yeah, we would always hope for it to be quicker. And the fact that you're able to achieve that with a lot of your clients, yeah, that's an amazing thing. Communication is vitally important. With my work as a mortgage advisor, communication is everything. It's the most important part of the service that I provide. I often worry that with some solicitors that I deal with, that how they communicate is a little bit outdated and the level of service isn't up to scratch, as you've maybe alluded to with some solicitors. Do you think that's the case with some solicitors?
I agree. Some solicitors, contract pack, for example, I would hope to think in this day and age, we still get it by email. I still get post. I still get fax. I don't know when the last time I personally used a fax, but there we are. There's those kind of communication breakdowns, really. And I just think if everyone just used up like an email or just picked up the phone, really, like if there's like a query and you just think, right, okay, you know what, let me just ask it quickly and we could deal with this in like 20-second phone call. I see why not, really. So yeah, it's a big breakdown, to be fair. When it comes to my clients, I do say to them, being very like proactive, to be fair, is probably the word I'd want to use here. The more proactive they are, chase your agent, chase your broker, chase the seller through the agent and say, look, what is the holdup? Sometimes I'm just sitting on a file because the other side just haven't come back to me and, they're bogged down with a load of files or whatever the transaction. So if my client then chases the agent then chases the seller then chases their solicitor, the things will move around. It shouldn't be like that, but I don't know. There we are, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I agree with that. And that's interesting because that's something I say to all of my home buyers is to be proactive and to take a little bit of responsibility in terms of chasing all parties and also ensuring your own understanding of the process. I actually had a little bit of an incident recently with some of my home buyers and a solicitor where the home buyers were complaining essentially that they hadn't received adequate communication from a solicitor. They didn't really understand what was going on. They didn't understand what the hold-up was, and they didn't understand where they were in the process. Now, the solicitor's response was that they had communicated with the client X amount of times during a period. And to be honest, that did sound like a lot of communication. But the problem was that all of that communication was by email. They weren't reachable by the telephone. And still the client at the end of all of that contact didn't have the clarity that they wanted. So where do you sit on that fence?
I can't really speak for the solicitors, and that's why I moved away from 9 to 5, to be honest. And I completely understand the frustration that was involved, that could have been involved in your client. And it still happens in this day and age, to be honest. And, I would go into those kind of offices and they'd be like, oh, just take a message. I'm too busy. Or I'm in a meeting, and then they'll forget about returning the call. And the email would just be responded to like a week later. Like there was like no urgency. And I think that's why I was just like, right, okay, it's just not ethical for me to work for a firm like that. And I think a lot of these kind of like factory call center kind of firms do unfortunately work like that. So I actually move away from it. I do have a 2-day policy. So I say within 48 hours, I will get back to you, whether it's by email, whether it's by telephone, even if it's that evening phone call. Sometimes I appreciate my clients will be like, Jazz, I work 9 to 5 like most. You won't be able to reach me 9 to 5. So of course I'm available for like that 8 o'clock Zoom, 9 o'clock Zoom. So it's just making sure you find a solicitor that is in alignment with the way you want to work as well and the way you want to be communicated. So I have a lot of first-time buyers that are a bit anxious and they're like, Jazz, just tell me every step of the way, even if it's a weekly email to say nothing's happening, just let me know. And then I have like the serial investors that kind of say, I know exactly how the process works. No need to tell me, just let me know if there's a delay because of X, Y, and Z, and then I'll start chasing. So it just kind of depends on the kind of client you get and then the kind of solicitor you get. Like I said, I'm available by both telephone and email. Why that isn't the case in today's age, I don't know. It's such a frustration, to be honest, because I go to these networking events and literally they're like, you're the reason for the delay and my case is held up. And I'm like, oh, like, why did you choose the solicitor you chose? Like, I wonder what the reasoning was behind that, because sometimes, cheap is, that's the other thing on this. People think like, you know what, I'll get a solicitor for 150 was what one person said to me, £150 for conveyancing. Can you do that? I'm like, definitely not. And I'm sure those kind of transactions do exist, but when are you completing? Like, how long is that process taking as well?
Yeah, exactly. And something I say to my home buyers is ultimately 99% of mortgage advisors will be capable of something I say to my home buyers is that 99% of mortgage advisors will be capable of identifying the most suitable mortgage deal on most occasions. Okay. However, what you need to think about is communication, relationship, and experience. That's the most important thing. The core aspects of doing the job in terms of being able to source a mortgage, I'd like to think most of us can do it. But yeah, those elements are so much more important because buying a property is stressful enough. There's enough riding on it. It's the biggest financial transaction of your life so far. So you need to work with somebody who communicates well, who you can build a relationship with, and ultimately who's going to enhance your experience rather than make it more of a negative one.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better. Don't you agree with that?
If you didn't know by now, I work as a mortgage advisor helping first-time buyers from around the UK to take their first steps onto the property ladder. If you want to buy your first home, but you're not sure where to start, head over to my Instagram page where you'll find the educational content that you need. As well as that, you'll find testimonials and success stories from my home buyers. Back to the podcast. What makes, in your opinion, what makes a good solicitor and what makes a bad solicitor?
Well, I guess from customer feedback, I always get the bad solicitor is the person who I can't get hold of, who responds to my email a week later, who goes on holidays and the case is passed on to another solicitor and that solicitor doesn't know what's going on. Or you're dealing with a junior and then the file needs to be signed off by a senior, which then takes another level of delays to the transaction, to be honest. Whereas, of course, the good solicitor is a complete opposite of that, knows exactly what they're doing, they've got experience, you can pick up the phone, call them, and you know where you are in the process. And that's exactly how you want every transaction to be. And that's where we can achieve that 4 to 6 week transaction, really. You're not waiting 4 months or possibly more, really, for that transaction to complete because you've appointed a bad solicitor.
Yeah, and interesting that you've mentioned there about junior solicitors. So something I've experienced recently is solicitors who I've worked with for many, many years, senior solicitors who have been in the job for a long period of time, who I know have always provided a great service. However, in recent years, what seems to have happened is they seem to have lots of junior solicitors now working underneath them, or assistants, or whatever the right term might be. And we don't really hear anymore from what would have been the senior solicitor. And that can cause a little bit of a breakdown in service in terms of clarity of who's in charge. And ultimately, we understand that lots of junior solicitors or assistants are more than capable and do a fantastic job, but it isn't always the case. And as much as anything, it is that clarity of who actually is in charge of this case, who actually is the most important point of contact, and who's going to ultimately give the home buyer the answers that they need.
Exactly. You just want peace of mind, to be honest. And I think it's not like really the junior solicitors. I think it's the paralegals that are actually acting on the transaction. And you don't hear from the acting solicitor at all, to be honest. Rightly so, like even in the emails, even when I'm exchanging contracts, completing, it's always the paralegal. And from my side, that's fine. I mean, if you're on point and you know exactly what you're doing and, you know, it's all done in a timely fashion, that's great. But then, you know, sometimes I've had someone come back to me and ask a query where I was acting for the sale, and I disclosed a property information form, and in that property information form it said the occupier will be residing. Then they asked, well, is there going to be notice served? Well, no, because the occupier is your client, the purchaser, who is the tenant. Now, something like that, there was no reason to raise the query if you just read the documents properly, effectively, and just know that the occupier is your client. Now, we're going back and forth in correspondence. It's just unnecessary, to be honest.
Yeah, and if somebody's listening to this and they are concerned about choosing the right solicitor, don't be shy, and you can speak to solicitors before you choose to move ahead with them or to work with them, and understand how long does it take you to communicate? How do you communicate? Are you willing to use WhatsApp? Are you available for telephone calls? You know, if it is going to be a 2-day delay until I hear back for an email, will that be the case? Could it actually be longer? And yeah, don't be scared of asking those questions and really making sure that before you choose who it is you're going to proceed with, you're comfortable with the service that they provide.
I agree. I mean, the more questions you ask your solicitor, at the end of the day, you're paying for a service. So I don't understand sometimes clients are like, oh, I'm feeling a bit intimidated. Well, if you're feeling intimidated, don't instruct them, to be honest, is my answer. There should be like a nice flowing relationship, really, a friendship, like where you're building on. You can be like, right, you know what, I'm just going to pick up the call and speak to Jazz. Like that's how my clients are. And be like, oh, hi, Jazz, you know, how's the weekend? It's like very like easy flowing. It's nothing corporate about, like really like stress on that, because I actually have some clients say to me, Jazz, I'm going to move on to you because for my next transaction, because I just couldn't get hold of them. They had like a whole caseload of files and I was just like a number, and you don't want to be a number in something so big to your life as well. You want to be known as Mr. Smith or Mrs. or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you've raised there, and that might actually be the headline of the podcast. If you feel intimidated by your property solicitor, don't use them, because that's something I agree with. And my business as a mortgage advisor is all built on the fact that people choose me, and people see the social media and they think, oh, Dan seems like a good lad. He seems like, maybe I like him. Maybe I've seen the work that he's done in the past with other clients. And yeah, I think that's a very useful and important thing. So how can a home buyer choose the right solicitor?
So I guess my number one would be always ask them about capacity. Ask them straightforward, how many files are you taking care of? For example, if they say 100, you kind of know where you are on that list. If it's 40, like normal average, I say no more than 40 per calendar month is how many I do. And that gives me enough time to go through each one and deliver the service on delivery. So it kind of depends on how much capacity they have, and that would be my number one question. Number two would be fixed fees. Make sure whatever they're quoting you, you are not alarmed on the 11th hour, to be honest, and you're not suddenly like, oh my God, like they're charging me £100 here, 200 there, this has VAT, I wasn't aware of it. So, I mean, as soon as you get the quote, read the fine print. It's always in like size 8, to be honest, with some of these law firms. So just make sure it's all fixed fee. And then finally, communication, of course, make sure that you are making them aware that how you want to be communicated. If it's by telephone, email, are they able to do that? And is it going to be themselves, or is it going to be like the receptionist just giving you a quick update? Are you okay with that as well? So those will be like my top 3.
Yeah, and I agree with all of those points. If you scroll through LinkedIn for long enough, you will always find somebody complaining about a solicitor in the property space. Do you feel that solicitors get too much flack within the process?
Yes, they do, to be honest. And I don't know, I think it's personal experience, and then we all get tarnished with the same brush, to be fair. That's why I'm constantly LinkedIn on socials, and I'm like, I'm your solicitor. I can do it in 3 days. If you want it done in 24 hours, we'll do it in 24 hours. I'm available. I shout and scream about it on socials. Like if anyone went on my socials, that's the first thing you'd see and be like, whoa, like she is. There's like so many people that have come through and be like, wow, it's so refreshing to even see a solicitor on socials. And I think a lot of the good ones should do that as well. So we're known for it and not behind like a screen or something, to be honest, because everyone's like, oh, they're either boring or you can't get hold of them. My transaction's been there for like 8 whole months. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's a sad state of affairs, to be honest. I am constantly convincing, even now, like someone's like, why should I choose you? You know, all solicitors are slow and your price is a little bit higher, but this is why it's higher. If you want a service for it, of course, you've got to pay for other than 150.
Yeah, and what you've mentioned about solicitors not really being on social media is true. When looking for a guest for this podcast, I could only find 2 on Instagram, and that's it. Whereas even in the mortgage advisor space, there's so many accounts now. There's so many mortgage advisors on social media now, but that doesn't seem to be the case with solicitors. And I think with property solicitors, historically, that has been a bit of a faceless position in terms of you just working with the company name, and not really knowing the individual who's looking after your transaction. But yeah, if you are looking to buy a home, I'm a big believer in whether it's working with an estate agent if you're selling a home, whether it is working with a mortgage advisor or a solicitor. Get out there on social media, follow them for a few months, decide, do you like them? Do you trust them? Have they worked with people like you in the past? And ultimately, as you've mentioned, are they going to provide the sort of service that you would like? So yeah, it's great to see that you are on socials, and I've got no doubt with the high quality content that you are posting at the moment, lots of people are going to find you and yeah, choose to get in touch. So when a home buyer is working with a solicitor, quite often they may feel a little bit helpless as to how it is they can move the process along. So what are your top tips for a home buyer and how they can best work alongside their solicitor?
Sure. So I think the number one issue we always have is source of funds. And there's a lot of back and forth on this because a client is like, well, I provided it to my mortgage broker, I provided it to the estate agent. I even spoke to the lender, why am I now doing this whole thing all over again? And then you're asking like 10 folds over as well. It is the way it is. It's an AML policy. So I think as whatever you've provided with your mortgage broker, provide it to us as well. We need to review it as well. Sometimes I don't know how detailed mortgage brokers go, but for example, if it's a client coming to me and saying, Jazz, here's 6 months bank statements, it's all in my savers, there we are. It's not good enough. I need to understand how those monies have accumulated. So I might have a client say to me, Jazz, I sold a house 2 years ago. I need to see a copy of that completion statement 2 years ago from the solicitor. I then need to see a bank statement into which those monies travelled into. Same with a pay slip as well. If a client says it's through salary, I need to see 6 months pay slips. I then need to see 6 months current account into which the salary is going. I then need to see the picture from current account into the savers. So I think the more documents you have there, the better it will be for me to understand, and I'm not going back and forth a lot as well. So I always say to my client, I need 6 month statements, and I also need to understand how you accumulated that wealth as well. Another thing would be, I think a lot of clients don't appreciate surveyors. They're always like, right, okay, my lender went in and they said everything was fine. I don't need a surveyor. I can't stress the importance of having a home buyer surveyor. Like, I think it's a couple of £100, and how much it can tell you is like mind blowing. It can tell you about cracks. It can tell you whether there's been like a side extension that's been removed or anything, like more intricate detail that your lender's valuer may have not picked up on. And then you can use it as well in negotiating tool.
So yes, I completely agree in relation to a property survey. Something I say to all of my home buyers is you wouldn't buy a £300,000, £400,000 car and not have a mechanic make sure it works first. So absolutely get a property survey. Well, Jazz, thank you very much for joining me this week on the Let's Buy a Home podcast. If any of our listeners are looking for a property solicitor, where can they find you?
They could find me all over socials. They could find me on Instagram under UK_property_solicitor. They can find me on LinkedIn, Jasbir Dhaliwal. Email me, jazz.dhaliwal@taylor-rose.co.uk. And then, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you to our listeners for joining us once again. We'll be back next week with another episode.